Hello, I'm Carwyn Morris and today I'm going to be talking about Blake 7. And I thought I'd do it now because we are only a couple of months away from actually Blake 7's 40th anniversary. Because the show ran between 1978 and 1981. It ran for 4 seasons, created by Terry Nation, the man responsible for the Daleks and Davros. I thought I'd talk about it now because it's a show that I grew up with. It was on TV when I was growing up, and during sort of the 1990s we had a sort of a bit of a revival of shows during the 90s. Things like Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Stingray, classic Who, Blake 7, Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and it was sort of depending on what day of the week it was sort of counter programming as to what was happening on the other side. So I thought I'd talk about it because I know that there's bound to be people who've never heard of Blake 7, which is really unfortunate. But I got to know about it because it's sort of what I grew up with. I was on a Sunday morning, and whatever was on BBC Two I was going to watch, because I wasn't going to watch any churchy shows on BBC One. That's a fact. So I would always watch whatever was on BBC Two or whatever was on Channel 4. ITV and BBC One I just stayed away from. And Blake 7 happened to be one of the shows as well that had a bit of a revival and was put into that time slot. So after 40 years, how does Blake 7 hold up? Well, visually it doesn't. But I'm sad to say, but after 40 years it really doesn't hold up at all. It's horrible to look at. It really is. The visual effects, I mean. But the one thing you should know is that if you're talking about classic shows like Blake 7, like Doctor Who, whereby you're going to go back and look at the older episodes, the one thing that you should really keep in mind is that back then, the BBC regarded science fiction as subgenre. In other words, they didn't invest enough into the shows. They would put drama, they would put period drama, they would put documentary and all that way above it, and news shows and everything like that, and then science fiction was way down here. So when it came to budgeting the shows, they would just give them the bare minimum, and that was it. And they had to make the shows because obviously that's the way the BBC is funded, is through TV licence. So if you pay a TV licence, then the BBC have to make as diverse a TV schedule as possible, just to please the audience that's paying for the licence. So they have to make the show regardless, but they don't have to put that much into it, and they never did. They would always look down their nose at science fiction. I believe during the production of Sylvester McCoy's Doctor Who, just as an example, there was a period drama on at the time, and the budget for one episode of the period drama was the same as the budget for the entire season of Doctor Who. That's the equivalent of what it was that they were doing and how they would budget for science fiction back in those days. But anyway, back to Blake 7. So the visual effects in Blake 7 aren't very good. Okay, they don't hold up. Some of them are really, really bad, including the teleport effect, which sort of goes like that. It's just it's a really naff effect, and when they land on the planet, there's sort of this pop, this bubble that sort of goes. It's a real nasty effect. The costumes make them look like sort of 70s disco space pirates. They're bad. The sets aren't very good. The sets are pretty wobbly, in fact. Sometimes you can even see it when people sort of press a button on a panel or something, that the entire panel will flex. Or in fact, there are points where they hit a button and the whole panel moves, where it hasn't been glued down properly. So it's the production values of Blake 7 aren't very good at all. But all that aside, Blake 7, particularly season 1 and season 2, are very good to watch. like really good to watch. It's a sort of a mixture of The Magnificent Seven, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, George Orwell's 1984. There's just so much mixed into the genre, into the show, that it's well worth looking. The story is about a political dissident in Roger Blake who has been tortured. He's had his memory wiped, and he's been put back into society. And the reason being that they haven't killed him is because they don't want him to become a martyr. It's the only reason why they've kept him alive. And the government has now arranged, put things in motion whereby they've arranged a death for him. And it's going to be, there was an accident and he died. So that's how but they want to do it in such a way that he is discredited first. So they trump up these charges of child molestation. Bear in mind this was 1978, so they're trumping up molestation charges. Dealing with political dissidents and terrorism. This is a really engaging show, like absolutely 100% engaging. And what makes Blake 7 different to the other shows that were on at the time, things like Star Trek, things like Doctor Who, all the other sci-fis and all the other sort of TV shows, even the cop shows that were on at the time, was that what was really good about Blake 7 was that all the heroes in the show hated each other. I don't mean the actors, I mean the characters. You know, you had Blake, Villa, Avon, who else? Jenna, Callie, Gan, Aurak, and Zen. And they just clashed all the time. They were the proper sort of dysfunctional crew. Not one of them, at any one moment, one of them would either leave the other one for dead, or it would always work out that way. I mean, characters like Avon, who was the he was the computer tech, electronics kind of guy. I love the character of Avon because he is just cold. What a cold bastard. He is I love him because you can't really argue with his philosophy, which is kind of, if we don't do this, we are going to die. If we don't leave that person behind to die, we are all going to die. And he would always be that sort of clean and cut about it. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't a lie. And he's a character that I really liked. Also, the character of Villa, who was a pickpocket thief, who was definitely a coward, 100% a coward. He was scared of the entire world around him. Jenna, who was a smuggler and a pilot as well, quite a strong lady character for the time as well, because she wasn't just a secondary character. She was a bit kick-ass, and she wasn't just there to be an assistant. She was very much her own woman, and she would just as well punch you in the nose as just She was a very strong female character. Callie was a bit more, because Callie was the telepath, and she was a bit more girly, but I guess that's where all the characters were. Each character was clearly defined, in other words, but none of them sort of really meshed. They did after a while, but there was still a point whereby it was like, these are a band of rogues. They were the proper sort of anti-heroes, and it was a disorganized, dishevelled crew. And then of course you had the villains of the piece, which were supposed to be the government, which was the Terran commander Servalan, and I like Servalan. I really do like Servalan as a villain. I think Servalan is one of the best villains you could ever ask for. She's a very strong lady. very cold, and very concise as well, and it had a sort of a lack of tolerance for incompetence. So yeah, there was Servalan. I can't remember what the guy's name was. Oh, he was the cyborg bounty hunter type thing. Again, the costume for him wasn't very good. That's why I think Servalan worked so well. Actually, it was because her costuming actually was very glamorous. It was a little bit over the top, but it was glamorous, at least. But yeah, so the first 2 seasons of Blake 7 is dealing with this fight against the government and the oppression of the government, and in particular because the government has in fact tainted the water supply to make people more subservient. And Blake finds out about this, and given that his nature of the fact that he has been tortured and has had his mind wiped, and his family has been murdered by them, this is sort of a show that fights back. So yeah, the first 2 seasons are really, really good. I think season 3 and season 4, it does deteriorate, and it's not that the stories don't. It's not that the stories then keep disintegrating. The stories vary. Sometimes you get a really, really good story, sometimes you get a really bad one, sometimes you get an okay one. They just fluctuate. They're less consistent than what they were in the first 2 seasons. And then, of course, we get to the final episode. And if you haven't seen Blake 7, I'm not going to tell you what happens in the final episode. I can't tell you what happens in the final episode. I don't know what happens in the final episode. Nobody knows what happens in the final episode. So that's the good thing. If you haven't seen Blake 7 and you end up watching it and you get to the final episode, trust me, you will be just as confused by the end and going, what? As just like everybody else has for the past 40 years. It's one of the endings to the show whereby I think it's a good ending to the show. It's just everybody is just like, you are kidding me. You cannot leave it there. That cannot be the final episode, which of course it is. So I think one of the things to take away from after watching Blake 7 as well is that I personally feel right now that they should remake Blake 7. If they announced tomorrow, if the BBC said, we are going to make Blake 7 from scratch, all over, from the beginning, and we are going to do our best to give you this top quality sci-fi show based on Blake 7, I'm going to say take my money. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there, finish off my coffee, and say, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to like and comment on the video. If you've seen Blake 7, what do you think? Would you like to see a new one? If they announced that a new Blake 7 was going to be made, would you be excited for it? Leave your comments down below, and I'll see you later, guys.